Gal Gadot and director Patty Jenkins returned for this second installment of the formerly much-lauded Wonder Woman series. This time out, we've moved forward from the first film's World War I milieu to 1984, where Diana Prince is working as a curator for the Smithsonian Institute. When an ancient artifact that seems to grant one wish to anyone who holds it falls into the hands of a maniacal self-help guru, Diana must track it down before the wishes it grants tears the world apart. The film came under harsh criticism on social media upon its release, and I do agree with some of the charges leveled against it. The runtime did seem to be bloated, and perhaps the casting of Kristen Wiig, who generally I do like, as the villain here was not the right choice. And Pedro Pascal's mask-off performance seems to have inspired him to go almost completely off the rails. But I think the primary issues are with the script, especially with the third act that not only tests the audience's patience in terms of pacing, but also seems to meander listlessly, almost into total absurdity. To me, Gadot has created a fierce, incredible portrayal of Diana Prince / Wonder Woman, one that leans into Gadot's seemingly eternal spring of self-confidence, her charm, and a classic Hollywood screen persona. She does well with what's given to her, save for a scene at the film's end in which she seems to address the viewer directly to the camera. From a directorial standpoint, Jenkins' second superhero effort shows that she clearly knows how to direct action sequences as well as any of the boys in the industry. To me, the issue is the film doesn't seem to know what it wants to be or what it's even trying to emulate. It tries to shoehorn in an interesting Indiana Jones adventure plot into a movie that also has two supervillains. The bag was certainly mixed on this one, for me, but it was more entertaining than most of the recent DC releases, save for maybe Aquaman. So I think the sophomore slump will be forgiven in future installments. But perhaps I was just starved for spectacle for not having been at the theater this year. JB, you and I watched this film together. What were some of your thoughts? Do you agree with my assessment, or were you a little more critical?
It sucked.
That's your bottom line?
Yeah, it was awful. I mean, it was on par with Captain Marvel and the last disastrous X-Men movie.
I mean,
how you can screw up Gal Gadot? How you can make her look awkward and just look like she doesn't know what the hell she's doing. Chris Pine I happen to like. I don't think he's a bad actor, and he wasn't given much to do here. The plot is stupid. The overacting by Pedro Pascal is just incredibly bad. Kristen Wiig is like, she's okay in a romantic comedy, but it turned her into a cheetah at the end of this thing, which was terrible.
Yeah.
It was just awful. Everything about it was just terrible. I mean, it was just such a disappointment. You know, you waited so long for the sequel, and they killed it. They just killed it. They didn't even take advantage, really, of even the setting of the 80s. Like, you could have gotten a little bit more juice out of that. But this idea that, this wishing stone, and suddenly the Pedro character becomes the stone. What the hell? And then somehow, because somebody, the Kristen Wiig character wishes for strength, that saps Wonder Woman or her strength. Come on, give me a break, will you, please?
Yeah, I mean,
that was great.
Yeah, I guess it didn't leave me much room. I thought there were some redeeming qualities of it, and again, I do think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I hadn't really seen a big action movie, and sometimes you just get that itch, and the only way to scratch it is to see something kind of new. And I don't know, I came away semi-satisfied, but I did think the last 45 minutes kind of dragged.
Oh, man.
It was because they were trying to balance too much stuff in the script. I do think it would seem that the script probably got a lot of notes. They're trying to shoehorn in, again, too many elements to really make a sustainable movie.
And we're trying to give us some kind of message that, if everybody's wish comes true, it can't come true because that means somebody else has to suffer and this worldwide calamity. It's like, why does everything have to be so cataclysmic? Why can't it be a little bit more, centralized to a geographic area? Why is it the same with the Marvel things too, with the whole world's at stake? Why can't there be something like in Omaha that needs to be addressed? Let's get there and take care of it. I mean,
I agree. I think that's the strength of films like the Christopher Nolan Batmans is, I mean, obviously there's a nuclear event in the third movie. That seems to be where it kind of gets a little bit untethered. And I think a lot of the mixed reviews came in there. But up to that point, they kept the scale relatively insular to a geographic area. It's something that you're like, okay, I think you can, you can grapple with it a little bit better than you can when these sort of world scale events, especially something so as ambiguous as the threat that was posed in this movie. And again, I don't really know what they're trying to get at with the sort of direct camera address Godot does.
Pat didn't see it, but maybe we should bring him in. But the reality is, it's just, in my view, it's sequelitis. It's sophomore-itis. This is what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Second one, Rocky 2 is not as good as Rocky 1 and that kind of thing. But where you point out with Christopher Nolan, you go Batman Begins and Dark Knight. I mean, he elevated the game. You go Godfather, you go Godfather 2. I mean, so there are certain, but you can count them on one hand, the number of sequels that have even been close to the original.
Well, you'll see our scores on screen right now. You'll see has not been graded kindly across the board. I think our score ended up resting right around a 70, which we said is below average, but it sounds like you think it's much worse than that. And I think it's like just decent. I think it's popcorn fare. I've been more disappointed by other films, like the one you mentioned, X-Men Dark Phoenix, but that's, sort of par for the course with these things.
An opening montage of historical footage set to Marvin Gaye's immortal tune, Inner City Blues, Make Me Wanna Holler, can only mean one thing: the newest Spike Lee joint. The Five Bloods tells the story of 4 African-American Vietnam vets who return to Vietnam in the current day to resolve some unfinished business. The former squad mates are searching for the remains of their fallen squad leader, Stormin' Norman, played in one of his final roles by Chadwick Boseman, who was killed in action during a gunfight with the Viet Cong, and a long-buried treasure of gold that they left behind. The Bloods are joined by Paul's concerned son, played by Jonathan Majors, as they return to the jungle and the memory of the conflict which shaped so much of their lives. Returned to the heart of darkness, the Bloods must reckon with the forces of man and nature, and the lingering specter of the Vietnam War on the oppressed on both sides of the conflict. Now, this is not your typical Vietnam film, although surface references to classics of the genre, such as Apocalypse Now from 1979 and the Rambo films from the late 70s forward, abound. Spike goes to lengths to humanize the people of Vietnam, both during the war and dealing with its aftermath today, as opposed to dehumanizing them as enemies that you may have seen in some of those older films. Spike also playfully grasps some of the plot and many of the themes of the John Huston classic, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre from 1948, to help propel his action. And I always enjoy Spike's deep love of film history that I share. But with The Five Bloods, Spike is most interested in exploring the long-term damaging impacts of the systems of oppression that made the Vietnam War possible, that led the U.S. to send a disproportionate number of black soldiers to fight in a war against people that they had never met and had, no previous conflict with, as the movie points out. He was asking, what is the real cost in human lives that are ruined by such a conflict? And I think the crux of that for Spike, and in the movie's knockout performance, Delroy Lindo as Paul, is to also explore how people who are touched by a conflict like that internalize that oppression and carry it with them throughout their lives, to the point where Paul, in the present day, is a diehard Trump supporter, much to the chagrin of his son and certainly his squad mates. So I really like this film. I think it challenges your expectations and assumptions about the war in Vietnam, while still delivering the thrills and a number of top-notch performances and action set pieces from its ensemble cast, including the unfortunately late great Chadwick Boseman, who you discussed previously as potentially one of the best actors of the 2000s so far. Spike is also the only filmmaker, I think, who should be allowed to use What's Going On from now on, because he makes truly excellent use of Marvin Gaye's seminal album as a background to the action of the movie. So I really enjoyed this film. Really excited to talk through with you, RC, and JB, what your experience was with it.
So, Pat, you touched on it. You did an excellent review. I think our opinion was a little bit split. Just in terms of how we graded out, I think you ended up grading out about 10 percentage points higher than me. I think you deemed the film 81% out of 100, which we call like about a good film, and I was closer to 70, which is sort of below average. And I'll give you sort of my perspective here. I almost felt like the film got lost in some of the illusions it was trying to make. I think Spike's directing style is incredible. I love some of the theatrical effects that he did, especially the replication of the 16 millimeter film or 8 millimeter film, flashback sequences. Yep. The use of the older actors in the flashback sequences, I thought was just an inspired idea. But to me, by the time I got to the middle of the film, I didn't feel like there was a drive towards one specific thing. I think he had so many ideas here, he couldn't decide which one to really put at the front of the queue. And to me, that was where the movie seemed to get a little bit bogged down, and where it lost me a little bit going into the end. I think there were some issues with the tone of it. The filmmaking, again, to your point, as always, is totally top-notch. Soundtrack, color, cinematography, just directing style is incredible.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from there as well, RC, because I think the first time that I watched it, I definitely you get to that middle point and you're like, all right, well, is this a story about buried treasure? Is this a story about war trauma? And what the legacy of that is for both soldiers and civilians. And it does lose some of that and sort of flips. And I think there's some guilty pleasure in the third act. There are some exciting things that happen. I don't want to, fully spoil, but there are some, genuinely exciting things that come to, a mixed conclusion that does sort of muddle the message a little bit. Yeah. And sometimes, I love Spike. Sometimes a little bit on the nose, and sometimes he's a little bit more subtle. And I think watching it a second time helped me this time really focus in. I think I focused in mostly on Paul, on Delroy Lindo, who is, I think, alongside Storm and Norman, the central character of the film, and it's astonishing performance that really asks you to struggle. Like, how does this guy go from, a devotee of Storm and Norman who, has a pretty enlightened view of the world to where you find him paranoid and, ranting about walls and immigrants to his squad mates there. And it really questions like how, and it doesn't offer an easy answer. There's no straight line in Paul's life that leads him to that. And that, I think, is what's interesting about this film, and I think certainly the most challenging aspect of it as well.
Absolutely. I think that's well summarized. Let's throw up the graphic and just talk about some of the scores. You can see there, critics seem to like the film. Audiences are also, not quite as high on it as critics, which you see a disconnect on movies like this that, I think Spike Lee movies in general sort of have their audience, have their devotees, and have people who aren't quite as into it. And then you see our score, which settled directly in the middle of the two of us at a 75.5. So a decent film. I would absolutely say it's absolutely worth a watch.
Ten things I took away from the film Mank. Number 10. As the title implies, this movie centers on Herman Mankiewicz, played by Gary Oldman. Mankiewicz is a veteran screenwriter in Hollywood. Had been around a long time at the time of the Citizen Kane project. Prior to that, he was at Paramount in the 20s and 30s, head of screenwriting at Paramount Studios. But as the Depression wore on, work trailed off and he started to turn to drink. Number 8, Orson Welles, played by Tom Burke, of course, burst into the worldwide scene due to his radio broadcast, The War of the Worlds. And by the time he was ready to do Citizen Kane, he was a ripe old age of 24. He was looking for a studio. Nobody would deal with him because he was too young and impetuous, they thought. Number 7 is a struggling RKO Radio Pictures studio cedes to all his demands and gave him total control, including Final Cut approval, which was unheard of back then during the studio system. 6, director David Fincher, known for his relentless attention to detail and pursuit of excellence, filmed much of this on the actual ranch in the California desert, where Mankiewicz actually did write most of his dialogue and work for Citizen Kane. Number 5, DP Eric Messerschmidt uses black and white film here, but it's remarkable. We were talking about this, about the lighting that's used to the point where after a while, you don't realize you're not in color. It just seems to be a natural way of shooting this particular film. I don't know if it's the period or such, but it's not something that gets noticed after a while. Number 4, Jack Fincher does a great job with the dialogue here. It's very erudite. Language is crisp, and the vernacular is right on for the period of this time in Hollywood. Number 3, one of my favorite actors, Charles Dance, plays William Randolph Hearst, and it's great casting. Dance has that presence about him, but particularly here as Hearst, he plays a guy that is just dying to sort of lash out and to lose his cool and to be this sort of terror. But he just, something within him that says, I won't give people the satisfaction of seeing me get very upset. Because there's a scene in this movie where a drunken Mankiewicz just goes off right in the castle of Hearst. And Hearst, in the form of Dance, just restrains himself, and you were just waiting for him to explode, but he never does. The other thing is, Amanda Seyfried is in this, and candidly, I didn't really know she could act, and she does a nice job as Marion Davis. I really have to say she's vulnerable, smart, and I didn't really realize she was that good an actress. Of course, number 2, Mank and Welles had a very public falling out over Mank's claims about his contributions to writing the screenplay, and basically they never spoke again after they had the initial argument about it. But it ends up finally that Citizen Kane in the 1942 Oscars was nominated for 9 Oscars. Shockingly, though, only won 1 Oscar, and that was for Best Screenplay, which the two men shared, but never shared the stage because they weren't, Welles was not there. I believe Welles was not there. So, I mean, in many ways, this film is sort of a poignant film about a guy that was on death's door in the form of Mankiewicz. And Welles came along and gave him an opportunity of a lifetime, and he kind of realized it halfway through and then decided to change the terms of their negotiation, in terms of their deal. And it's kind of interesting to watch that character go through that. So I'll throw it back to you guys.
Pat, what was your reaction to this film?
I was really excited for this film, and it didn't quite live up to the hype for me. I liked it. I didn't love it. And I appreciate all the historical aspects that you were just describing, JB. And the thought and the care, like the clear thought and care that went into this project is evident in every frame. And it's sort of a daring subject to take on, and an interesting approach. I think an interesting approach to the typical Hollywood story. But something about it just doesn't click with me, unfortunately, and holds it back from a good film, holds it back from being great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, and I'm reviewing my notes for the show. One of the things I wrote down is the first 20 minutes I wrote down, yikes. I just thought the pacing was so off. And, I think it's expectations, the expectations for you set for a David Fincher movie and sort of what the parameters are of it. And this is a major departure from the rest of his filmography, as far as, as tone even, and subject matter, a lot lighter than his normal fare. And, it's extremely well made. JB talked about cinematography. We were talking off camera. There's a shot of Marion Davies and Mank talking on the ranch, I think, and it's shot directly into the sunlight. And it's this beautiful image that, you'd be hard pressed to capture that without totally burning through your film. But there's just some very nice technical touches. I thought, all the technical stuff was there, but I don't know, is there a real interest for this film to a general audience? I think we agreed probably not. Is it transcendent, either in the performances or the script? It's good. I don't know. I wouldn't ever call it great. So it's kind of tough to know. I think David Fincher basically got a freebie from Netflix, which is great. I'm glad they're supporting him. And he did his most personal film, in his opinion, a film that was written by his late father. And he knew that this would be a shot to get it off the ground. And maybe we should have known better when, sometimes when there's a little bit of All in the Family, as The Godfather will show, it doesn't necessarily come out great. But let's throw up the ratings graphic, because JB did a good job touching on some of the major points of the movie, some of the performances, things like that. All three of us obviously saw it. Came in at a 78.3 for us, which is, I think in our parlance, a decent movie. I wouldn't say go out of your way to see it. If you're not somebody who really is interested in cinema history, may not be for you. Metascore agreed with us almost directly. They're at about 79, and IMDb has it at a 7.1. Another one of August Wilson's legendary plays is brought to vivid light in George C. Wolfe's dynamically directed adaptation of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. The film chronicles a fictional account of the 1927 recording session of the eponymous single over the course of a hot Chicago day. Tensions build within the band and between the record label and Ma Rainey over the course of the recording session, and crescendo in a breathtaking nature. The film probes racial inequality in a poignant and nuanced way, showing a system, the recording industry here as a stand-in for the larger world, where businesses relied on black artists that they did not necessarily respect as equals. But because of the need for their talent, black artists are, to varying degrees of success, able to gain some type of foothold in a white-dominated power structure. This issue of artists versus the companies that profit off their talent has come to the fore again in recent months, with Dave Chappelle, Kanye West, and Taylor Swift all coming public with their issues about how their creative product has been handled by the companies who manage them. For me, the film is brilliantly directed by Wolfe. He utilizes an ever-changing kaleidoscope of camera angles and movement to keep the dialogue feeling fresh within the confined spaces of the studio and the rehearsal room. Wolfe's work is certainly going to be applauded, but it's really the two lead performances of the film, Chadwick Boseman and Viola Davis, bouncing off a great supporting cast that ultimately make the film soar. The ever-reliable Viola Davis gives a big, but also strategically restrained performance as Ma Rainey, and I'm sure that she will be seeing some love come award season. But the late, great Chadwick Boseman gives a career best turn as the ambitious young Levy, who is crackling with energy and has a hair-trigger temper that drive the tension of the film. I've watched this film twice already, and it had the same impact on me both times. To me, that's a sign of true craftsmanship. I think this is a must-watch. Pat, what about you?
I also like this film quite a bit. Maybe not quite as much as you, but honestly, in the same ballpark. Yeah, it's a great. I didn't see Fences a number of years ago when that was produced. It's still on my watch list, and I really need to revisit that film. But so this is my first August Wilson adaptation, and I really liked it. I mean, I think it retains the parts of a stage play that are smart, that are build tension and add dynamism to the performative space, and it expands some of the things that you can expand with cinema in a really smart way. So it's great to see an adaptation that does that. It's great to see a film with so many good performances in it. I mean, certainly Viola Davis and Chadwick Boseman are great, but Coleman Domingo is really good. Glenn Turman and Michael Pot, just pretty much every member of the band is top notch, doing top notch work in this play or in this film,
in this adaptation. And that's the thing, is when drama can go horribly awry on screen. You can get very staged versions of plays that just don't seem to work. And then sometimes people take wild risks on how they're going to adapt the play. But you're right. They seem to excise everything that was non-essential, and they really just the web of character relationships and various tensions that build throughout the course of the day. In addition to obviously the words by Wilson that are so incredible in the way that they sort of, build character and reveal it. And sometimes those are like contrasting things that are going on. It's just really, really shows the work of a true master, a master craftsman. And I had to enjoy it. Now, I think from what I've watched this year, I think both Davis and Boseman are probably the two best performances I've seen. Would you agree with that generally?
Yeah, I think. I think this is even more of a standout performance than The Five Bloods, which we already talked about for Boseman, and I wouldn't be surprised. I am also very partial of Riz Ahmed in The Sound of Metal. I think for me, I have a really hard time choosing between those two, and I'll be really happy. I feel good and hope that they'll both be nominated, and would be happy if either of them take home the Oscar. And I think I don't know. Viola Davis I think she's very good, but maybe it's just the sort of meta text of the passing of Chadwick Boseman. But I think she could have been more central to the film. Maybe she's not meant to be, but like I kind of wanted more from that. Though I think the thing that my main complaint or my main critique of this film is that I think I wanted more of Ma, and I think I wanted to understand the direct conflict between her point of view and Chadwick Boseman's point of view, sort of as a sort of modernity versus the past point of view, which I think is teased out, but I wanted to see more of.
Yeah, it would seem apparent to me that there was some stuff left on the cutting room floor, because as I was reviewing video just for the stuff that we do, I noticed there were certain things in the trailer that didn't seem to make it into the film in any context. So I wonder how much was cut out and how much of that relationship was probably eked out in those pieces that we didn't end up getting to see. But, just for reference, let's look at some of the ratings here. You can see what the critics thought. And again, we ended up landing on an 83. So that's our first quote unquote good movie of the night. So definitely worth a watch. It's available on Netflix, so everybody can see it. Great performances, a nice, very taut runtime. Again, I agree with Pat. If you had tacked on an extra 20 minutes to it, I would have been fine with it, because I really enjoyed the space that the characters were in, and sort of the way the tension really ratchets up, because the movie does sort of abruptly come to a sort of a third act climax and then just sort of goes. So it's that is definitely a valid critique, but I just really puts you in the mind space of the characters, and I thought it's just an outstanding adaptation. So definitely check it out on Netflix.
Ten things with Tenet. Number 10. Tenet is a palindrome. The word is spelled the same whether you look at it backwards or forwards. Number 9. Tenet is a film written and directed by Christopher Nolan. Number 8. Film is beautifully shot by D.P. Hoyt van Hoytema. Number 7. Lead character is named protagonist, which of course is what exactly he is. Here played by the cool John David Washington. Number 6, Kenneth Branagh plays the antagonist, Sador, a Russian oligarch. His performance here reminds me of his character in a movie called Jack Ryan's Shadow Recruit. Number 5, Robert Pattinson is Neil. He's an operative here and an erstwhile partner of the protagonist. And actually, I was quite surprised by his performance. I'm used to the intense, pensive Pattinson, but this was more an outgoing action-type performance, and he kind of lifted his game, in my opinion. So perhaps there is hope for him as the Dark Knight and his Batman going forward. Number 4, while Nolan loves to utilize practical effects, this movie CGI is used in a very cool way. I personally could not get enough of the reverse bullet trick. Number 3, reverse entropy is the key to this world. I defy you to find another film where you have heard that term used. Number 2, If it's a Nolan picture, you know that means that there must be, that's right, a cameo by Sir Michael Caine. And as usual, Sir Michael does a lot with less. And number one, with the release of Tenet, I believe this is the final installment in a trilogy of films, starting with Inception, went to Interstellar, where the central theme is time. I believe it is time to move on to new things for Mr. Nolan. Perhaps a reboot of a franchise. Maybe about a certain secret agent working for an organization called MI6? Just saying.
Thank you for that very formal sign-off.
Great. I love that.
So, okay, interesting. I know Pat's kind of, he's absorbed this through osmosis, through Twitter, film Twitter. So he's sitting in on this. JB and I watched this together. I think, I was saying before, I think every critique people have had, especially the other two movies that you mentioned, could be applied to this film. Constant exposition dump. There's constantly explaining what the stakes are and what's happening and how that's impacting things and what the rules of the world are. And they don't give it to you all at once. They give you a steady drip, and it goes through the whole movie, and it just gets in the way all the time. John David Washington, great. Rob Pattinson, great. Again, like a phantom appendage, having Elizabeth Debicki and Kenneth Branagh in here. I'm not really sure, outside of a plot device, what they have to do. I felt no emotion towards either one of them. Branagh giving a pretty standard Russian villain performance. And it was just so convoluted. The action set pieces were excellent. He does set pieces as well as anybody else out there. I'm trying to think of anybody who probably outpaces him, but people probably don't get the budgets that he does to do, practical stuff or stage things on the scale that he likes to stage them.
The only thing is comparable is maybe Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise.
That's a very good point. Yep, that's right. I said Tom Cruise and Christopher Nolan are probably the two best practical effects people left in the business that don't like to do green screen unless they absolutely have to.
No.
I enjoyed it just because, again, same sensation I had when we talked about Wonder Woman. It was like I was aching for like an action movie or something high concept. And this, it scratched an itch. Is it a great movie? No. Is it a good movie? I'm not sure it is. I think it's more decent or bad. And I agree with you. Maybe it's time to figure out a new structure for the films, or maybe go back to having somebody outside your family contribute to the scripts for your films. So you have the end product that's a little bit different than what we've seen the last couple times out. That's just me.
Well, I look at it and I said to myself, his films are so smart and intelligent in terms of the acumen that's required to sort of understand what's going on. You start with Memento, and it's sort of like that's an advanced placement biology class, and then you move into Inception, which is sort of like a graduate level, chemistry, and then you get into Interstellar, and now you're into physics, and this one, Tenet, is like quantum biomechanics or something. It's just like it's beyond the pale that anybody could sit there and really understand what the hell's going on. And I understand, even with the exposition being just in time, which in some ways is kind of cool, right? Because in many of these form action spy thrillers, the audience is way the hell ahead of
That's true.
What's going on.
Yep,
we know she's going to do that, and he's going to seduce her, and we know it, right? We still watch, but we know it. With this film, it's like, I didn't know what the hell was going to happen. And I had the same feeling that the protagonist, John David Washington, he really didn't know what the hell was going on. So it's almost like, hey, I'm in on it with you two guys. I don't know what was Barbara posted when she shows me the magic bullet trick, who that role reminds me of Q in the Bond franchise, right? He's setting him up with, hey, you have this weapon or whatever. But I don't know that it has to be so complicated that you can't give your audience a little bit of a break, because he's so good at everything else. You take a look at Dunkirk. He broke it out. He took a set structure there, but then he sort of stepped back and said, okay, I've set it up. You guys understand how time's working here? Yeah, another thing with time, right? The time for the guys in the boat and about to drown is different than Tom Hardy flying over the the English Sound. So he definitely has this thing about time. I just wish it's, like I said, it's time to put that aside. Let's go to something else.
Agreed. Now, Pat, one thing I would say, and I'll let you jump in, is I was thinking of other movies that use something, this sort of backwards, forwards thing more effectively. And the first movie that came to mind was something like Arrival that really uses...
Yes.
It uses it for a real emotional impact and to offer up questions that I think, you have some type of impact on your everyday life or how you live your life. And, and obviously that was adapted from literature. And I'm always saying, I think Nolan's a master storyteller, a master structuralist, but I don't think he's a great filmmaker. I don't think he does the things that are inherent to the medium the way that somebody like a Paul Thomas Anderson, a David Fincher, and a Quentin Tarantino do, mix and remix, or Spike. We talked about Spike earlier.
Yeah.
I don't think he is in the same class as them as filmmakers. I think as a storyteller, he's absolute top notch.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's, I feel like listening secondhand to a lot of this, it's like the same criticisms that he normally gets. Like the sound mix is weird and hard to understand. It's high concept. I mean, I'm still going to see it. I just, I don't know. My family's not interested in seeing it. So it's like, all right, well, it's hard to say. I will say the biggest disappointment for me is that people continue to have can't figure out how to use Elizabeth Debicki, who I keep waiting for somebody to come along and make great use and make us the star that I think she deserves to be.
She's going to be in the Crown, right?
She is going to be Diana at the next
yeah.
Maybe that'll do it for her.
Yeah.
I certainly hope so, but because I want to see her in more things. But that's all I have.
I just final comments. I'll throw up the graphic on screen here, and we can see how we grade it out.
Pixar's latest feature-length animated film from co-directors Pete Docter and Kemp Powers was released on Christmas Day directly to Disney+. And in Soul, a mild-mannered Joe Gardner, played by Jamie Foxx, or voiced by Jamie Foxx, is a middle school teacher with a passion for jazz. After a former student gets him a successful audition at the Half Note Club in New York City with the legendary Dorothea Williams, he falls into an open sewer and separates his soul from his body. Finding himself in the great beyond, he's determined not to enter just before his big break, and he stumbles into the U seminar in the great before, which is where souls develop and gain passions before being transported to a newborn child on Earth. So saying more now would spoil much of the movie, so if you haven't watched Soul yet, you may want to pause this video and come back for some of our discussion. Try and keep it light, but it's hard to talk much further without saying more. I will say that this is the Pixar's most visually interesting feature to me in ages. The Great Before and the Great Beyond are equal parts Powell and Pressburger's A Matter of Life and Death and 1960s Disney rival UPA Studios cartoon. And that is contrasted expertly with the film's New York City, which is almost photoreal, certainly in contrast with the other environments. It feels photorealistic, and it is incredibly vibrant, especially in these quarantine times. It felt like being, in the village, being somewhere, in Midtown or downtown Manhattan. It just was a really unique experience for us at this point. The soundtrack is equally standout with an orchestral score by newcomers to the Pixar family, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. What a world where Trent Reznor is providing Pixar scores, and then equally compelling jazz compositions by the great John Baptiste, an array of musicians under his lead. The film also features Pixar's first black lead, voiced by Jamie Foxx, Joe Gardner. and a large Black supporting cast. And co-directors Pete Docter and Kemp Powers really wanted to showcase those characters that exists beyond the historical, unfortunately, deeply racist historical presentation of Black people in animation history. So, what is hopefully a big step forward for representation and adding voices to the mix of animated films here. Kemp Powers actually also wrote the play. If you watched our weekend preview, we recommended to you One Night in Miami, Regina King's debut feature, and he wrote the play that is based on. So, really interesting mix of creative talent here behind this movie. So, that's my take on the film. I think it was the most technically, narratively ambitious Pixar film in years. I really liked it. JBRC, what did you think?
JB?
I'm not sure. It was a thought-provoking film, but it was confusing, I have to admit. It had a variety of different messages. I'm not exactly sure which one they want you to sort of come away with, because there was a little bit of, sacrifice and then not sacrifice, and potential not fulfilled is the worst thing. So, repent your sins, but then again, live for the day, because you don't know what's going to happen. There's an afterlife, but maybe it's a little bit different than you think it's going to be. So perhaps, do what you can. It was the characters were interesting. I thought the acting was very good. The voice work I thought was very good. And I think that they did do a nice job setting up this world. And you're right. After a while, you kind of forget, which happens somewhat with the Pixar films. But this one, you're right, Pat, was probably the first one where it was, that sort of hybrid of almost, almost real, lifelike enough where it's like it's that merger between animated and live action type thing. So It was good. It's just one of those ones where I guess there were so many things they're throwing at you. I'm just not sure exactly what was the lesson they wanted us to take, or maybe it's just like there is no lesson. There's all these things, possibilities out there. So maybe you pick up one that you think is particularly important to you, and maybe you go with that. So overall, it's an impressive piece of work. I'm just not exactly sure what they were trying to tell us.
I agree almost 100% with your assessment. I think thematic density is the one thing that struck me. I just feel like in past Pixar films, there's usually one central takeaway that you really can latch onto. And that really is the crux of providing you with sort of the heartbreak feeling that, obviously gets redeemed in a Pixar movie, and there's some uplift towards the end to make you feel better as you come out of the theaters, but you kind of have to go through the wilderness first. And usually it's built around a central theme. Now, this film, it's just tough to handle so much sort of existential and sort of ambiguous subject matter and package it up neatly. And they certainly tried. I give them credit, and Pat's right. The visuals are absolutely stunning, especially in the afterlife. The Powell and Pressburger reference abound is just, an even bigger improvement on visuals that they use to present the afterlife. I liked it. I think all Pixar films are good. I graded this out as good. Collectively, we graded this out as good, or I'm sorry, right on the edge of good. We had a rate between decent and good. Pat obviously coming in with the highest score, me with the next, and then JB a little below us. And you can look at sort of where Metacritic and IMDb's landed. I liked it. I felt Coco hit me in every heartstring when I saw it. And same thing with Inside Out. So,
yeah, that's what I was curious about, because I liked both Coco and Inside Out. I liked this better than I liked, I think, either of those movies. I think they're all good movies. I liked them better. I was curious how you guys reacted, but it sounds like you would rank this one at the bottom of those two.
Yeah, I think I'm just a simp for, maybe it's just an expectation set up for animated movies that.
Yeah.
And I think increasingly it would seem that Pixar is coming movies more for parents in terms of the crux and the messaging.
Yeah. Because I think it is really because it focuses so much. It's like a misdirection with the idea of the passion. What is your passion?
Yes.
And I think that Joe thinks that his passion is jazz. And the movie like presents that as a passion. And then at the end, I think there are seeds throughout it, and I guess we'll spoil it a little bit here, but I think that the passions are meant to be like, if you can connect with your passion, it's how you can do good in the world and have an impact in the world. Because I think it's through Joe's passion for jazz that Questlove's character, who gets him his break, is a jazz musician. And there's the young girl, the girl from his class who clearly loves music and wants to quit. And you see the impact that Joe, the teacher, which is a part of himself that he doesn't necessarily value, has had on that. And it's almost like a little bit of It's a Wonderful Life, where, Peter Bailey wants to leave Bedford Falls, but, he's so integral to that community. So I don't know. I think it is a subtly, of maybe all the animated films I've ever seen, outside of maybe some of the Studio Ghibli pictures, it's a very subtly made point, because it does that twist right at the very end in a very subtle way, in a sort of an unexpected way, and undermines its own messaging to that point. So totally understand where you guys are coming from, but that's I thought that was the interesting trick that it at least attempted to pull off.
But how great is it, just to sort of sum up our first episode of Drive-Thru Reviews, all these films we got to see in our living rooms. I mean, these are some really high quality films that have come out, and, things have been bad, but I would love to have seen some of these things in theaters, but it is pretty awesome for us, the consumers, to be able to sit at home in our pajamas and watch some of this stuff. So we hope you enjoyed our first edition of Drive-Thru Reviews. We'll be dropping reviews regularly as things come out. If you haven't already looked at it, there'll be there was a weekend preview last weekend, and there will be one coming out on Friday. So make sure you look on our channel for that. And in the interim, like and subscribe. Plenty of new content coming down the pipelines. We got big plans for 2021. And I thank both of my co-hosts, JB and Pat, for being here with me. And until we talk to you next, we will
see you in the movies.